Unrest has been growing in Iran. What started as a small and isolated protest to express economic grievances has spread wider and taken on a political dimension. The growing seriousness is reflected by increasing violence and the death of a number of protesters and police. And of course, Donald Trump has weighed in with comments on Twitter. What are the protesters asking for? How is the government responding? And what is the likely outcome of the protest, the worst of its kind, in Iran since the Green Movement of 2009? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Anna Tangen, our regular CGTN commentator. We shall also speak via satellite to Russian defense analyst Pavel Fagenhor and Mustafa Hussein, an Iranian senior political analyst. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's look at this.
An unexpected protest stretching into the new year. Beginning last Thursday, demonstrators took to the streets in Tehran to protest high living costs. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani believes that the rally contains multiple layers of intentions.
Their problem is not only an economic one. It's not like the people have come to the streets to say that we want money, bread or water. They have other demands as well. They are claiming for other things as well. One of them is allowing for a freer environment.
When the protests later spread to more cities and turned against Islamic regime, Iranian authorities called on people on Saturday to avoid illegal gatherings, as they will create problems for themselves. But protests continued to grow and led to more deaths and arrests. For the first time, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei made a public comment.
The enemy is waiting for an opportunity, for a crack through which it can infiltrate. Look at the recent days' incidents. All those who are at odds with the Islamic Republic have utilized various means, including money, weapons, politics, and the intelligence apparatus, to create problems for the Islamic system, the Islamic Republic, and the Islamic Revolution.
Initially, U.S. President Donald Trump showed his support for the rally on Friday, but later he used the chaos as an excuse to impose more sanctions on Iran as the protests became more violent. Tehran initially criticized Trump's remarks as deceitful and opportunist, and earlier Tuesday, without naming the United States, Iran's leaders claimed that its enemies were the ones spurring on the violent clashes.
Welcome to Dialogue. Let me first cross over to our Persian commentator who's standing by in Iran for his comments on the latest development. Hello, Mustafa. We are wondering aloud why your spiritual leader and the elite Revolutionary Guards have exercised utmost restraint on the current protest and the movement. I don't know why. Let us know why you have exercised self-discipline and self-restraint.
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, as a matter of fact, this is not a major challenge. Let me, provide you with some kind of, image about what's going on in Iran. Just today, millions of people were out in different cities in order to condemn these riots. Back in 2009, in the post-election riots, after months of riots in larger numbers, millions of people eventually got to the streets and in support of the establishment and put an end to those riots. The hope is that the same action today and tomorrow in Tehran, of course, or the day after tomorrow in Tehran, this would happen again and would put an end to these riots. If not, then the police would start, heavy-handed tactics probably. A little stricter measures will be taken. But the point is that the sizes like this, Iran has over 3,000 towns, townships, and cities, and with populations varying from tens of thousands to millions. Now, these protests that are of two types, protests for economic austerity plans and against them, and the riots that came in smaller numbers. First, the economic protests against the austerity plans and energy prices started in some 15 to 17 cities, but as soon as they changed nature into riots, the protesters disappeared from the streets, and these riots were seen only in 7 to 8 to 9 cities and towns in, whose population vary, as I said, from 100,000 to 1 million. And the number of rioters has never been more than 500. In many cases, there have been only 200 people. So we're basically talking about 200 to 500 rioters in cities with at least 100,000 population. That means 1 in 1,000. So it's very small in size, and the police can control it. But because there are some, protesters that are out, very small ones, of course, I mean, the numbers are small, that are just conducting peaceful protests, and they are among the rioters, the government doesn't want to harm them. The government is thinking that it can control it, and the people themselves can control it, and it doesn't want to harm those that are still out for peaceful economic and rightful economic demands. But of
Thank
course,
you so much for briefing us on the background. Let me get back to the Beijing studio, asking for the two guest speakers, He Wenping and Anna Tungan, for their comments on why the self-restraint and why President Rouhani says the demands of some of the protests are actually legitimate, refusing to launch a severe crackdown. What are your thoughts on the self-restraint?
Yeah, I think there are two reasons basically behind this kind of action. First is the protests are peaceful at the beginning. So that's Rouhani said people have the rights to show, to let their voice be heard. So it's peaceful. So those riots has happened later on. So and then also the President Rouhani said if those things go to the riots, and then the police also have their rights, to put the things in order. So this is number one. Number two, I think the reason is the Iranian government want to show of all of the world that this government is open, is democratic, it's not something when the people on the street beginning and then use those very harsh way to crack down them. So I think the two reasons behind.
Instead of launching very severe and bloody crackdown on the protesters, Anna, what do you think of the patience of President Rouhani and indeed that of the spiritual leader?
Well, you have to separate this. This is not a political action. This is something that's coming out of
You mean they don't have protesters? Don't have
they don't have a
leadership?
No, they don't have a. It's not a leadership.
Do they have a clear political agenda?
No, they don't. Quite frankly, they're upset. What has happened is, first off, Iran is not the Iran of the revolution. You've seen a steady growth in urban population. You've seen a lot more middle class. In many ways, Iran has been able to weather some very, very difficult times very well. But in the past year or so, Iran has increased its production largely through unused capacity by 30%. So there's a lot of money coming in. Unfortunately, employment has gone up. The cost of living has gone up. So there's some structural issues that have to be dealt with, and I think this is what Rouhani is talking about, and he wants to put a little pressure. There's a tremendous amount of the economy which is run by the kind of religious side of the political establishment as opposed to the purely political side, the government side. So there is frustration. It's there. You have a country that has 40% of its population under 25. They have not been able to kind of keep up with the job demand, and this is what you're seeing. So it's not political. It's frustration. Donald Trump is trying to pour gasoline on what is a small fire and make it larger. This is not what the world needs, another political catastrophe in the Middle East. It is not something that would end well.
Are you suggesting that despite the partial lifting of the economic sanctions on Iran during the Obama administration, Iranians are still suffering the bite and toll of the economic sanctions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no question. There was a small bounce in there. But the institutions that served them well during the period of time when they were literally under state of warfare under these very repressive sanctions unfortunately, are not geared towards a free market. You have a very small, medium-sized, business enterprise. In China, SMEs are the ones who create 80% of the jobs, are the ones who are dynamic. In Iran, you have a very literate population. I mean, it's one of the best educated in the region, very sophisticated, increasingly more urban, and they want jobs. So it's just about frustration at this point.
That's why President Donald Trump says Iranians are hungry for food and freedom. That's his version of, I hate to use F words, but very controversial comments from the White House. But let me go to Pavel Fagohar, the Russian defense analyst. He's standing by in Moscow. Hello, Pavel. Iran and Russia have both been listed by the U.S. as autocracy, meaning there's little margin for free expressions. However, what we see in Iran is the outbreak of anger in the streets of major cities, pouring scorns on the regime, and they voiced their protests, be they economic or political. So what do you make of the nature of the Iranian government and indeed the demonstrations? Do you think Iran is democratic?
Well, to some extent, yes, absolutely, it's democratic, but the Iranian kind of government, so to say, is a very split entity. There are the Revolutionary Guards, there is the Shia theocracy, which is not democratic at all, and then there's the president, which is elected by universal suffrage. There's the government, there's the parliament, and this, when we speak about Iran, there's many Irans. And some of these Irans want to have a kind of more or less better relations with the West, economic development, and there is the Revolutionary Guards, the Quds Brigade that's leading offensive wars, overseas wars in Syria, in supporting the Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and that's eating up a lot of the Iranian oil revenue, a lot of money, and that's what the people also dislike. So this is, Iran is split. And right now with these unrest, different fractions in that split government are actually pursuing different agendas. The president and the Rahbar, the spiritual leader, are actually very different animals, and they have different agendas on their hand.
Thank you so much, Pavel. Mustafa. We have heard a lot of stories about the Iranian government tightening grip on the social media, and this time around access has been denied by the Iranian authorities to the social media network in the hope of avoiding any organizational work by the opposition, if any. So what do you think of the nature of your government? Is it a democracy? Because everybody understands your Grand Ayatollah, the spiritual leader, is the paramount leader, despite the elected presidency.
Let me explain this to you. It's very simple. There were peaceful protests in the street, and nothing has happened yet. But some social media platforms and applications that are admittedly run and funded by the West, they actually, some channels in them, try to provoke the protesters into riots, and they did so. And they, for example, taught people how to, remove handcuffs, how to storm military bases, how to disarm IRGC, Basij, and police and law enforcement troops, and worse, they taught them how to make Molotov cocktails. And Iran objected several times to Telegram, asking them to shut down that channel. They first, promised cooperation, and they closed down that channel for a couple of hours. Iran did not slow down the internet or did not shut down the social media network
excuse me,
then.
The second point of my question is the relationship between the president, the elected president, head of the country, and your spiritual leader. Who has the final and the highest authority in this case?
They are on the same page.
They are on the same page.
Remember that Iran is not a theocracy, as my colleague said from Russia. Iran is not a theocracy. Iran is an Islamic democracy. They are on the same page, actually. You could see that the Iranian leader has a number of duties under the constitution, and the Iranian president is the #2 man in the country, and he has been vested with authorities under the constitution. They are going along pretty well. There is no clash between these two, actually. Their words are the same about these protests. And I would like to remember one more thing. That was the government and not the establishment or the leader or his institutions that shut down the social media application. As far as I know, in China, the same is true with regard to some applications. Whenever, the Westerners do not, cooperate with their enemies like China and Iran, there is no other option but to do so. Just last night, in one single case, very fast, I'll tell you, the deputy leader of AFP ultra-right party in Germany, he received thousands of congratulation messages from Muslim immigrants and refugees. In return, he said he doesn't know why the German police is so soft towards these hordes of male Muslims. Then the German government asked Twitter to shut down his page, and they did so right away. Then the same guy went to the Facebook, another Western company, and released the same message. At the request of the German government, they shut his page down right away. You can compare the severity of these messages. One message is teaching people how to make Molotov cocktails. The other one...
Well, you've been talking about the conspiracy theory, mobilizing the broad masses to overthrow the regime. My question is very simple. Going back to the second point in my first question is, the question is very simple, Mustafa. Which is more important, Quran or your constitution?
Our constitution is based on Quran.
Well, that's a very diplomatic answer.
It's not now. It's not after the revolution. Remember, it's not after the revolution. This constitution that is based on Quran and the need for respecting Quranic rules has been approved by the parliament over 100 years ago. And the same is true with regard to Iraq and many other Muslim countries. There is no clash between these two.
Thank you so much. That's a very clear answer. Thank you for clarifying this critical issue. Welcome back to the studio discussion here in Beijing. Wenping, how do you forecast the immediate future of this current movement, which is not a serious matter for what happened in the year 2009, the Green Movement?
Yeah, it's not a comparison with the event happened in 2009. Actually, I have some friends from Iran. They told me now today the situation is more calm down now comparing with days ago. And also, I think the situation there, because before it's just complain about job, complain about those price rising and all those economic those issues. But when it's moved to the political and diplomatic things, I think now also this test, I think, the bottom line of the government. So government also now take action. So I fully believe that the Iranian government is still very strong, and so there's no, I think, hope saying maybe the government will have some the Crown Spring, those kind of judgment. It's not that time yet.
Common sense says loud and clear. Politics is based on the livelihoods of the ordinary folks, right? So what should be done to repair and reform the Iranian economy given the severity of the economic sanctions? Earlier, Anna, you said there is no serious entrepreneurship or any serious industry in Iran after decades of sanctions. So what's going to happen next to improve the livelihoods so that grievances about the economy will be ironed out?
Well, I think this has been Rouhani's main point through all this thing. He says,
will it be a devastating challenge for the presidency of Rouhani? Will he be replaced?
Ironically, he's being blamed for something that he's trying to change, but the frustration is there. That's why I say this isn't political. But if there is a very, very hard crackdown, it could become political, could go underground, and could be difficult. I think the way that they're handling it now is far better. They're showing the world that they can act with some restraint. But this idea that you can deny it's happening or just just say, oh, poo-poo, it's only 500 people. I don't think that is correct, and I don't think it does a service to Iran. I think Iran should be pointing to the fact that they are trying to handle this situation in a very open fashion, and just leave it at that. As I said, this is not political. There are no list of demands. There's nobody knocking on the gate saying, unless you do these things, we're going to take this to the streets, or we're going to do something else.
With your explanation, we are coming to terms with the patience of the Iranian government. Let me go back to Pavel Fagenhor. Pavel, do you think Iran shares much of the same problem of Russia, which is also subject to the resource curse? Russia depends heavily on its export of energy and gas. Iran, similarly, doesn't have a serious economic structure or industrialization, given the religious and political reasons, I mean economic sanctions because of the nuclear ambition of Tehran. So what do you make of the future economically of Iran?
Well, yes, there is quite a similarity. The main problem, kind of internal politically in Iran and actually in Russia, is that the economy is not growing, and there's economic social frustration, which can lead eventually to actually political frustration and political unrest. And what both countries really need right now is an investment boom. They need an influx of technologies and capital to kickstart the economy going. Just the oil revenues won't make that. And there's the problem. There's a problem that both Iran and Russia are on bad terms with the West, from where the main kind of technologies and capital can come. And secondly, there's a problem with the internal corrupt and cumbersome bureaucracy. Doing business in Iran and in Russia is problematic because the rules are very strict. The bureaucracy, the red tape is very thick, and there is corruption there. And that means investment is not coming in. After the nuclear deal, investment didn't really, there was no investment boom in Iran, and so the people didn't really get nothing much out of that. And that's what should be really addressed. Investment climate, first of all, and kind of try very hard to scale down the confrontation with the West.
Mustafa, for most of the overseas observers who follow your development very closely, they understand, right or wrong, that liberal market economy or capitalism, the idea of a capitalism, should be the curse for the Islamic Republic. In that case, even with the strong assistance and help from your neighboring countries like Russia and China, it won't be easy for Iran to get industrialized. Do you think this will be something very serious for the future of their economy?
You know, there are many people in here, many experts, economic experts, who believe that Iran has always been, managed with liberal economy and neoliberal economy, actually, and they see the problem in there. There are indices to measure that, and it's proved that they have never gone, for socialist economy. They have always been trying to, act like some economies in the West. But the problem that one of my colleagues has stated very correctly is that, the sanctions have been removed just on the paper. Many people know that all throughout the world, that the sanctions have never been removed in action. They are in place. The SWIFT doesn't work for the Iranians. This has been stated not just by the Iranian president and officials, but by foreign ambassadors, like the South Korean ambassador to Tehran, who said he is traveling with money, cash money, in his bag when he wants to bring the funds for his embassy, for his operations. That's the problem today, that the United States defied its undertakings under the nuclear deal, and they knew that they had developed a structure against Iran, and they want more. It's not just the nuclear,
Mustafa,
industry
presumably, economic sanctions have been lifted completely. Is it possible for Tehran to usher in a new era of liberal economic market? I mean, do you really welcome capital to pour in to help you?
Well, of course, foreign investment is a major, it plays
but
a
don't
major
forget
role
that Shah,
in,
the former,
Iranian
the
economy.
deposed king of the Persian state before 1979, took much of the blame for welcoming with a bear hug Western capitalism, and he was condemned for that. Do you think you're going to repeat his mistakes, quote unquote?
Well, the problem is that the former king and the former dynasty, it was not just the capital market that was his, shortcoming. There were many other things. He was the gendarme of the United States in the region. He exported oil and purchased only weapons, and he was a puppet of the United States. That's a completely different case. With regard to the Islamic Republic, it's trying to be independent. There are many in this part of the world that are asking why Iran has been under so crippling and increasing, intensifying sanctions for the last 4 decades, but it has made a major breakthrough in nuclear industries, aerospace industries, satellite making, and in cancer technology, in nanotechnology, cancer treatment technology, and many other fields of science, while it has been under such harsh sanctions. But Saudi Arabia, a very close ally of the United States, that has larger, way larger oil income, it has failed in developing any, homegrown industry.
Let me go back to some of the points you came up with, Mustafa. You spoke of Saudi Arabia, the geopolitical arch-rival of the Persian state in the Middle East, because of the proxy war in Yemen and Syria. Now, despite the poor economic performance of Iran, do you think such a bloody proxy war, quote unquote, would further drain your financial conditions and strength?
Well, basically, one of the main reasons that President Donald Trump is sending his deceitful tweets is that in about a couple of weeks from now, he is to make several decisions with regard to continuing the deal with Iran, the nuclear deal with Iran, or decertifying it, continuing the suspension of the sanctions over the paper, of course, or not. And also, Iran is going to have very vital negotiations with FATF, the Financial Action Task Force.
Excuse me, Mustafa, you always point your
January,
finger to the U.S. president. But what about the legitimate grievances coming out of some of the protesters about your foreign policy? I mean, your proxy war with Saudi Arabia would threaten to further drain your economy and would be a drag on the Iran economy. But thank you very much. We have tons of questions about the future of the economy. Within the remaining time of the meaningful discussion, let me come back to the Beijing studio. Wenping, what do you think of the foreign policy of Iran? Do you think it's a part of the catalyst that has triggered the massive protests?
I think, yes, it is. We have to admit that. Because for Iran, it's, even for those leaders, it's very hard for them to keep a balance between those foreign policy, because this is a great country. They used to enjoy a very glorious past, and it's under the pressure coming from Saudi, coming from also like U.S. after the Trump becoming the president. You can see those Muslim ban, those lists, Iran is among those countries' lists. So they have to. There's a balance now. It cannot keep it in a very good way. So I think that's the tragedy.
Given the anger of the Israeli government and the severity of the economic sanctions imposed by the U.S.-led crusade, and very quickly, what do you think of the future of the Iranian economy?
They need to get out of these wars, and they need to start concentrating on what they can do with their economy to promote innovation and get beyond anything that the U.S. or anyone else can do to them.
Well, we keep our fingers crossed for Persian and France to walk out of the economic mire. Thank you, guys, for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.